The Daetslov Act, Second Amendment Revision, National Mandatory Carry Act. Effective. That was not. Okay. The Daetslov Act, Second Amendment Revision, National Mandatory Carry Act. Effective. A date. The Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America is hereby repealed and replaced as follows. A well protected public being necessary to the security of a free state, the duty of the people to keep and bear arms shall be enforced strictly as provided for in this amendment. This whole thing actually started with the last part of that line. The duty of the people to keep and bear arms shall be enforced. Excuse me, the middle part. This was a response to a page on Facebook where I asked them to explain Barack Obama's gun assault weapons ban. They couldn't. The only answer they ever did give was that I was giving them NRA boilerplate horseshit. Oh, well, okay then. In order to do this, we would have to repeal the current Second Amendment, which is something that has been floated. So don't tell me that that can't be uh, proposed. Amendments have been repealed before, specifically the 18th Amendment. And in the title, there is a reference to that amendment. Prohibition was repealed by the 21st, I believe it was, Amendment. And the enabling act of the 18th Amendment was the Volstead Act. Daetslov is Volstead backwards. The duty of the people to keep and bear arms shall be enforced. Simple enough. Strictly as provided for in this amendment. That was a little bit more complicated. This is the final result, or the currently final result, of about 3 years of discussion in which people floated the idea that this amendment would also be whittled away at by the same kinds of forces that whittled away at this current Second Amendment. Title 1. To provide for the enforcement of the duty to keep and bear arms. The phrase, the duty to keep and bear arms, shall mean all arms in general, and firearms in particular, with special attention for handguns and pistols in immediate possession, long arms and shotguns in vehicles and homes. The phrase Mandatory Carry Act used in this act shall mean the provisions of this act requiring the bearing of arms. Okay, so the duty to keep and bear arms, simple enough. Firearms in particular, that doesn't mean you can't bear any other kinds of arms. Pepper spray, mace, batons, brass knuckles, knives, I suppose, anything that would qualify as a weapon. Later on, it'll address the question of body armor. Title 2, General Provisions. Section 2, Intent of Act. The intention of this act is to provide a framework for the enforcement of the act by law enforcement of the United States and for the lawful obedience to the act by residents of the United States. The people of the United States shall not be held hostage to antisocials who, being by definition criminals, ignore gun laws. All legal residents of the United States are required to, at all times, when not in their homes or temporary domiciles, possess a weapon as defined below. Okay, so this is a little bit of grandstanding, I confess. Shall not be held hostage to antisocials. Yeah, that's a little bit of grandstanding, but it really does make the point. They are antisocials. Whether they're terrorists or common criminals, it doesn't matter. All legal residents, well, a foreign national who is, let's say, on a sightseeing tour of the United States or just came to go to Disneyland is a legal resident. He has every intention of returning to Japan, China, Germany, Russia, France, Botswana, wherever the hell it is he came from. Doesn't matter. But he is a legal resident of the United States. I never do address the foreign national exemption because there isn't one. However, it would be well within consideration to give them a little more flexibility. Title 3 Definitions. Section 3 General Definitions. Firearms: any weapon that launches one or more projectiles or energy driven by the action of an explosive or energizing force. Pistols and handguns: any firearm without a stock intended to be operated by one hand. Long arm: any firearm with a stock or intended to be fired from the shoulder for which the barrel shall be 12 inches in length or greater and overall length of 20 inches or greater. Shotgun: any smoothbore firearm intended to discharge a number of smaller projectiles for which the barrel length shall be 12 inches in length or greater and overall length of 20 inches or greater or in or greater in the configuration as used. General firearms: any type of firearm that existed before the adoption of this amendment, including chemically driven, energy based, and combination of both. Assault weapon: any firearm fed by a magazine detachable without the use of tools, capable of discharging by design alone 2 or more rounds per singular trigger activation. Machine gun: any firearm fed by a continuous feed system. Autocannon: any machine gun of .50 caliber, 12.7 by 99 millimeter or larger. Rotary gun: any rotary multi-barreled machine gun, regardless of caliber. All other weapons: any firearm that does not match a classification herein contained shall require an all other weapon AOW permit and registration. Such permits shall be issued upon completion of a standard NCIC background check. Without discovery of an exclusion, all peace officers shall be issued a Class 3 permit without other restrictions. Body armor. Body armor refers to all protective clothing designed to absorb and or deflect attack by weapons. Handheld. Weapons meant to be held in an average human hand without expelling a projectile or projected energy. Armor penetrator. Any munition proven to penetrate military grade personal body armor in 9 out of 10 tests. Suppressor or silencer. Any device intended to reduce the noise or noises created by any weapon. Magazine. Any device intended for holding of munitions. Magazines of less than 10 round capacity may not be used in long arms except for maintenance and repair purposes using any type of inert or round or for storage in an empty status or in regulated competition shooting during an organized event. Barrel shroud. Any components installed on a firearm or other ranged weapon solely to protect the barrel and or like solely to protect the barrel or like component. Forward stock. Any covering or extension of a firearm or other ranged weapon intended to protect the user from the effects of the weapon, regardless if it protects the weapon or not. Other protective gear, personal protective equipment. Any gear, garment, or other article worn to protect against contamination, infection, or injury not caused by a weapon. Any item listed here is included under the protections of this act, including restrictions on state, county, and city ability to regulate same. There is no way restrictions, protections to future types of firearm. This in no way restricts protections to future types of firearms not listed here. The federal government may require enhanced licensing for the ownership of assault weapons and machine guns, explosives, and incendiary weapons and munitions, limited to a background check and recording of the owner's name, home address, weapons make, model, stored location address, serial number, itemized modifications, and stored location and weapon subject to not more than 3 inspections per year. The federal government is only authorized to charge for the processing to actual cost of government based on average cost of the previous 5 years, with said costs declared publicly in all possible formats. The states, counties, and cities are forbidden to require or ban the use of any PPE. Mandatory use of PPE not related to the nature of employment via regulating agencies can only be imposed by the president for a period of 3 months and thence extended by Congress on a 2/3 majority vote of both houses for a period of not more than 6 months per vote, and any state governors for a period of 1 month and extended by a vote of 2/3 of both houses of the state legislature for a period of 3 months per vote, with the acquiescence of Congress. Employers and other state parties are forbidden to require or ban any PPE under any circumstances. This section does not include the requirement to bear arms. Okay, so this is a long one. Firearms is a difficult word to define considering that they have changed over time. Technically, a railgun is not a firearm and is therefore not covered under firearms laws. Lasers, phasers, masers, all of those other energy beam weapons, they're not covered either. Okay, well, I think I addressed that issue with the definition of firearms. It covers everything, let it go. Pistols and handguns, you'd think it would be a simple one. It apparently wasn't to Congress in 1938. Long arms, same thing. For long arms, I set a barrel length of 12 inches, and 20 inches in overall all length, based on something the Army is actually currently doing. The M7 series has a barrel length of 12 inches for standard infantry, and I think 8 inches for combat support, medics, corpsmen, uh, combat engineers, that sort of people. People who need a smaller rifle that they can get out of the way. Shotguns and rifles are a little bit different, and that's fine. I did separate the two, but I put the standards exactly the same for both. Listen, a 12-inch, correction, 13-inch barrel on a handgun is kind of unwieldy. Most people can't do that. All right, anything shorter than that, it's probably a handgun anyway. The definition of assault weapons is based on 5 years of me arguing with Brent, trying to explain a definition for assault weapons that was so ridiculously restrictive that honestly, I couldn't do it. And the big tripping hazard was the definition of intermediate cartridge. I could never do it. I could never give him a definition of intermediate cartridge that he could actually test and say, okay, yes, this passes, that doesn't. In particular, and Brent hit me with this. R.A. Nussbacher, in one interview on the M14, refers to the 7.62 by 5.1 millimeter NATO standard as both a rifle, and therefore battle rifle, cartridge and intermediate cartridge. It's two different sentences, and I think they cut the interview up, if I recall correctly, but he does refer to it as both. With that in mind, I just had to let go of the idea of there being some sort of magical difference. Now, there is a difference between a pistol and a rifle cartridge, and that's not addressed here. Perhaps I should. But everything larger than a pistol really is just a rifle round. If you can give me a definition that I can test and consistently get a pass fail, drop it in the comments. I'll be willing to hear it out. I'd like to go over the list that I've seen so far. Bore diameter. There's at least one pistol cartridge that is 7.62. There's an intermediate, 7.6239. There's one that's both 7.6251, and there's one that is universally accepted as a battle rifle. It's 7.6263, better known as the 30-06. So, good luck with that. Range, 200 to 500 yards. Well, yeah, but that was based on interwar studies that said that infantry was generally killed and injured when they were fighting in the trenches of World War I at about a 200 to 500 yard range. Well, that's great, except for one thing. The trenches were at a generally 230 to 250 yard range apart. I don't know how this magical number came to be, but that was the magical number that they seemed to come out to. I also want to point out the Army's new M7 assault rifle has a range of almost a quarter of a mile and can still penetrate body armor and is still considered an assault rifle, which means intermediate cartridge. So, yeah, good luck with that one. Muzzle velocity. Also, along the lines of the range issue, you can tweak muzzle velocity or range or a half a dozen other things by adjusting the amount of bleed from the barrel or by reducing the powder. Now, it is easier to make the bigger round act like the smaller round. You could bring a 30-06 all the way down to 45 ACP if you're willing to invest the kind of trouble it would take to manipulate the cartridge that way. I don't think any sane person would want to be bothered. Adjusting a smaller cartridge to a larger one is a lot more difficult. You can't make a 45 ACP act like a 30-06. Or more to the point, I've never seen anybody do it. The closest I've ever seen is people who can make 38 special act like a 357 Magnum, but their guns have a tendency for extreme wear and tear. Extreme as in catastrophic failure after a couple dozen rounds, or maybe not even that. That used to be a cheat that Philadelphia police officers would sometimes use. They'd hand load their own rounds. Their on duty carry rounds would be 38 shell casings reloaded to 357 standard. It was very dangerous, and they sometimes did it. It is what it is. Machine gun. You know what? I went back to the first purpose of machine gun and found it very, very wanting. However, the universally acknowledged first machine gun is the Gatling. And the one thing it has in common with all other machine guns that came after it until about halfway through World War II, one rather, was that continuous feed mechanism. Now, I know the Gatling does use uh, what you might call a box magazine, but you can drop those box magazines in very quickly, so it's effectively a hopper system. And the very first Gatlins were, in fact, fed by a hopper system, not a box magazine. I'm sorry, it is what it is. You think I like this? No, I hate this, but it is the definition that fits the facts of the universe. Autocannon. I set the caliber at 50 cal because that's the point where you transition from rifle round to high power. Rather pointedly, the 50 caliber was developed with inspiration from the German Sturmgewehr, excuse me, Tankgewehr, which was a 14 millimeter single shot rifle intended as an anti tank rifle. Um, Americans and British and French got their hands on a couple of Tankgewehrs and the ammo and turned to John Moses Browning and said, "Hey, can you turn this into something?" Well, he took his M1913, I think it was, water cooled 30 caliber machine gun and stretched it out a bit to create what is now the M2. Rotary gun. You think this would be pretty simple? There was a couple of people who tried to make an issue out of it, so okay, fine. I'll toss that in there. The all other weapons, because there are some things that don't meet a easy definition. As it becomes standardized as a type, maybe a firearm will be taken off, or a group of firearms will be taken off the all other weapons list. That's a thing that could come down the line. Body armor. I made a point of it to include body armor in this list because Bill Clinton wanted to ban body armor. That was a bad idea. Armor penetrator. I included armor penetrator on this list because there are certain ranges where you can't have steel core bullets because they're called armor penetrators, even though they don't penetrate armor. You want that armor penetrator tag on it, you better go take it out to a range, test it on military grade body armor, and have it pass in the 9 out of 10 tests. Otherwise, you have absolutely no point discussing the matter. Suppressor or silencer. I included both terms in the definition because I got tired of this autistic ringing. Hiram Maxim filed his patent as a silencer. It doesn't silence the gun. You can still hear a well rod on a range, an active military range, from about 100 feet away. All right. It was ridiculous. On the other hand, there's the autist who insists it's a suppressor, it's a suppressor, it's a suppressor. Don't call it a silent. You know what? Stop. I don't want to hear it from either one of you. We're going to call it both under law. That's it. Magazine. Any device intended to hold magazine? Oh, yes. There was a couple people who argued that it's not a magazine if it's this, or if it's not a magazine if it's that. Okay, let's just get this squared away to begin with. That issue about 10-round magazines. There are certain states that ban any firearm over 10 rounds capacity. Okay, sure, fine. This bans anything less than 10 rounds. The original version actually just banned 10-round mags, and then Papa Carey pointed out to me that his own uh, handgun only carries 9 rounds. That's 8 plus 1, not uh, uh, 9 plus 1, not 9 in the mag and 1 in the chamber. Oh, yeah, he's right. There are pistols that might carry less than 10 rounds. Before I had finished completely figuring this part out, I was watching a Desert Brutality match, a Desert Brutality promotion video, really is what it is. It's no shade here. Okay. Carl has to pay bills too, and that's part of how he pays the bills, and he's doing something that needs to be done. So great, good for him. But it occurred to me he might have a match where, for reasons entirely his own, he wants to restrict everybody to 10 round reload, another 10 rounds. Hey, okay, I can work around this. In between those 2 points in time, I was actually working on my own AR-15 rather, and I have a 10-round mag, and I was just, I think I was cleaning the gun. Yeah, that's right. I was cleaning the gun, and I realized I'm using a 10-round mag in a maintenance capacity. That's how I came up with these different exemptions. Um, uh, Competition shooting, maintenance and repair, and storage. Barrel shroud. I made a point of it to define barrel shroud because I get sick and tired of people referring to the forward stock on an AR-15 as a barrel shroud when it in fact is just part of the stock. All right, you're supposed to grab it there. It's not protecting the barrel, it's protecting you. Forward stock. Also, I got sick and tired of people referring to forward stocks as barrel shrouds. Barrel shrouds is just this easy to remember term that nobody ever thinks about, like so many others on this list. Other protective gear, personal protective equipment. This is actually a response to the COVID-19 abuses. I personally took so some personal abuse, shall we say, of people demanding I wear a mask long after I had gotten over COVID and had been donating plasma for convalescent uh, transfusion, I think is what they call it. And I'm having this bitch calling me a Nazi and an evil person because I'm not wearing a mask. And that was in Shasta County, which absolutely flabbergasted me. With that in mind, I wrote that last paragraph specifically about PPE and what can and cannot be demanded. All right. I also made sure that there's a clause in here that says if you come up with something new and novel in, say, 20 years, like, you know what, a firearm that shoots knives rather than bullets, or something else that we don't we can't think of today. And by the way, I did think of sonic weapons. They're mentioned in the Left Behind series, yeah, amongst other sources. It's covered. Don't worry about it. This doesn't include exactly a listing of everything that can be regulated and the things that cannot be regulated, specifically assault weapons, machine guns, explosives, and incendiary weapons and munitions, and PPE, and the conditions under which they can be regulated. This is an example of assault weapons. We got an M16, an artillery Luger, although my understanding that artillery Luger, that first pistol with the stock lying underneath it, is that the real difference between that and a standard Luger is that thing underneath the barrel. That's actually a forward stock. Um, Mechanically speaking, that is. Oh, excuse me. Outwardly speaking, mechanically, the difference is all, I guess, in the bolt. We have an Uzi, iconic. Everybody knows that image, right? Maybe not, but we'll talk about that some other time. A Mac 10 or 11, I'm not sure which. We have a BAR. This is a slightly modified JPEG image. And of all things, a Shosho. You want to know any more about the Shosho? Just Google worst machine gun ever, and then go check out Forgotten Weapons video on the Shosho, and you'll be surprised. Yeah, it's not what you think it is. All of these have two things in common: detachable magazine feed and an automatic and/or burst fire capability. In point of fact, I think all of these are automatic. That's a Vietnam era M16. But the modern one is a 3-round burst. The first firearm to have a burst capacity was the Breda Prasa out of Italy, and specifically their Costa Rican contract. Breda Prasa's 5-round burst. I'm not entirely sure I understand how it worked, but it was some sort of lever system. Here we have some examples of machine guns. That top right, that's the belt-fed version of the M7. I'm sorry, I don't know what they're called yet. Next, we have an M240, which is still the current U.S. military standard machine gun, although that's going to go away with the Army very, very soon, and I expect with Marines not long after that. And RPD, which is a Russian belt-fed AK-47 variant. And of all the crazy things, a 22 caliber crank-fed Gatlin. That's also a rotary gun. It's just 22 caliber. That's it. Title 4, Background Checks. Section 3, Firearms. All persons seeking to purchase a firearm or obtain a concealed carry or restricted firearms permit shall complete a form not to exceed one sheet of paper generated by the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, identifying the individual, attesting that they are not excluded persons, and including fingerprints for comparison against established fingerprints of known criminals. No other information can be required nor requested, and any attempt to solicit such information shall be tried and convicted as a refusal to process and fined and imprisoned per Section 4. Said background are not permitted to take longer than 30 working days. Persons with an established NCIC file shall take not longer than 7 working days. Any background check not completed in said time frame shall be conditionally approved. Any background check not completed within 30 days of that shall be unconditionally approved. Time restrictions for an unconditional approval may be suspended during a state of emergency upon declaration by a governor or the president for the duration of the crisis, during which time conditional approval shall be reduced to 2 calendar days. All right. So anybody who has an NCIC file already, which I do, would simply get a live scan thumbprint. The computer says, oh, yeah, this is Michael Charles. He's got Michael Charlevoix, rather. He's got an established file. We know who he is. Give him the gun. Okay. But they do get that 30-day. Oh, no, they don't. They get 7 days now because I have an established file. Somebody whose prints don't exist before this might take a little bit longer, might have an issue. Okay, give them 30 days. Give them 30 days to process it. A conditional approval is they took longer than 30 days. They have to give you the gun. And then after 35 days, they realized, oh, wait, excuse me, after 35 days, they realized, oh, wait, Michael Charlevoix, he's a known felon. Oops, we got to go back and get the gun back. These things do happen. That is already the real world. They have up to 60 days to take a conditional permit back, or conditional approval back. After 60 days, it's an unconditional approval. They can't go back and take the gun. They're going to have to go to court and do something else. It's that simple. Time restrictions for an unconditional approval may be suspended during a declared state of emergency. Earthquake, hurricane, pandemic, legitimate pandemic. Come on, guys, get real. But during that time frame, and conditional approval is reduced to 2 calendar days, right? You walked in on Thursday, you said, I want that Glock 22. They said, okay, great. Here's the forms. There's the thumbprint. Go ahead and let's get this done. Friday morning, an earthquake hit. Well, that sucks. Because now, if you can get back to that gun store Saturday or Sunday morning, you have the 48-hour conditional approval. They have to hand that gun over. The difference here is, as long as the crisis exists, Your conditional approval is suspended. The crisis ends. Whatever the crisis was, it's now over and done with. Okay, great. It goes back to the original calendar. Title 4, Penalties, Section 4. Any person who willfully ignores any part of this act may be, upon first violation, fined not more than $100. Upon second and subsequent violations, $500. Upon fourth and subsequent violations, incarcerated not more than 23 months and 28 days and $1,000 fine. This includes failure to carry as required, carrying as prohibited, and use of terminology contrary to this act by anyone in a professional capacity. Failure to carry at the discretion of a court may be waived upon the payment of a $10 fine not more than 3 times. A judge who, upon probable cause, believes an exemption has been applied for under false pretenses may fine all involved parties not more than $2,000 and incarcerate them not more than 720 days, in addition to any fines and incarceration for underlying crimes. Okay. So you go out one time without your gun, you left it at home, you forgot it. The judge can just say, you know what, fine, pay the $10 fine and just remember it next time. You do it again. Okay, well, I'm kind of ambivalent here. I'm going to give you this third chance. Go away and don't show up in here again. You do it a third time. The judge says, yeah, you know what? I have the discretion to dismiss it, but I'm not going to. $100 fine. You're back a week later. This is now technically your second violation. That's $500. It would have been cheaper to get the gun now. Upon fourth and subsequent violations, incarcerated not more than 23 months and 28 days and $1,000 fine, I guarantee you that it would have been cheaper to just obey the law, which is the point of this system. A warning, a second warning, maybe even a third warning. Now it's kind of serious. You've got to pay attention. Now it's very serious. If you don't start paying attention, it's going to cost you. Now you really did screw up. The judge may incarcerate you and may fine you, may do one or the other. I said that 23 months and 28 days and that 72 day later based on 2 years that a felony conviction carries. That's it. That's the entire basis of both the incarceration and, by the way, the fine. Although the fine is set at half of a felony. You can't just felony out. You can't just break the law repeatedly until you no longer are covered. That's addressed later on. It becomes cheaper just to obey the law. There's also a point in here. Use of terminology contrary to this act by anyone in a professional capacity. I am so sick and tired of cops and reporters, in particular, referring to things as assault weapons when they are not. A particular personal frustration. There was an incident in which a gentleman used an SKS and an unmodified Chinese SKS at that as an assault rifle. It's a semi-automatic fixed magazine rifle, and this guy called it an assault rifle. It matches neither condition, but he referred to it as an assault rifle. That would be a $100 fine first time. And thank you very much. A judge who, upon probable cause, believes an exemption has been applied for under false pretenses. This comes up later on. There was a big fat loophole where you could basically skirt the law by just telling one little lie that's addressed in conditional exemptions and just keep repeating the lie. And then the cop can't cite you, the judge can't fine you, nothing can be done. Well, this closes that loophole and a couple of others. A false application for conscientious objector, a couple of others. And it also establishes punitive measures for somebody who applies for an exemption under false pretenses. Title 6, Other Provisions, Section 5, Exemptions, Mandatory Exemptions. The following categories of persons shall or may be exempt. Convicted felon, any person upon conviction of a felony who has not had their rights to vote restored. Restoration of duty to carry is required for restoration of voting rights for any public office or to hold any public office. This exemption shall be imposed and explained to those convicted of any felony at time of sentencing. Drug abusers. Any person convicted of a crime where drug abuse is determined to be a factor has voluntarily committed to outpatient drug treatment or inpatient alcohol treatment facilities or been referred to alternative judicial system shall be exempt during treatment and beyond in not more than 6-month periods for any one exemption hearing or 2 years total. This exemption shall be imposed and explained at time of conviction treatment order. Mentally impaired. Any person involuntarily committed to a facility due to mental impairment, determined incompetent to stand trial, or been placed in guardianship as an adult shall be exempt. This exemption shall be imposed and explained at time of ruling. Psychological incompetent. Any person involuntarily committed to a facility due to psychological impairment, determined incompetent to stand trial, or been placed into guardianship as an adult shall be exempt. This exemption shall be imposed and explained at time of ruling. Physically disabled. Any person presenting to a competent jurist documentation of physical inability to comply with the act, or to which the judge can, upon inspection on their own, determine incapacity to comply with the law, may be exempt. This exemption shall be imposed and explained at time of ruling. Indigent, any person incapable of compliance with this law based on judicially reviewed status of homelessness, may be exempt. Said exemption is granted as an affirmative defense to citation, and upon said determination, remain as a prohibition to carry. Membership in violent political organizations. Any person convicted of organizing, instigating, or aiding a violent political protest or a protest intended to create violence, even if no violence occurs, or interferes or attempts to interfere with voting, peaceful assembly, emergency service or public safety personnel, or elected or other public officials in the performance of their duties, shall be prohibited from bearing any weapons or any item determined by a peace officer to be intended for use as a weapon. This exemption shall be imposed and explained at time of sentencing and shall remain for the duration of their life unless the individual has had said conviction expunged, completed an additional 10 years without further political protests, and completed anger management training. While this exemption is in place, exempted under this section are forbidden to vote in any election for public office holder or hold any public office. Persons exempt under this section shall be prohibited from nor required to carry as restricted by a competent court, except as exempt under Part G or Part A pursuant to a conviction under this Act. Persons exempt under this section may have their exemption rescinded at a later date as provided by law under the same conditions as restoration of franchise. Persons exempted under Part G may only have their exemption status rescinded by dismissal or exoneration of the underlying criminal charges. Persons exempted under Part A may not have their franchise rights restored until such time as their duty to carry is restored. Any person who applies for a mandatory exemption shall be exempt to such a degree as is proved by the judge to include total restriction, partial restriction, general restriction based on category, or selective. All right, so let's address a few. Convicted felon. Felonies are a different category of crime. You have to really work to get a felony. I've had a felony charge hanging over my head at one point, and the DA knew that that wasn't never going to fly. He was just using it as a way to coerce a guilty plea. He'll dismiss the felony charges in exchange for the guilty plea. That didn't quite work out the way he wanted it to, but that's a story for another time. You have to actively do something with a degree of forethought to get a felony conviction. That said, you can get a felony conviction reduced in effect, in realistic effect, with time and effort. Some crimes, the time is shorter and the effort is lower. You know, you were 19 and you sold a little pot and you got busted at a time when pot was an automatic felony. 20 years later, you've still got that felony conviction? Well, maybe not so much. There's also a little clause in here that says you cannot get your right to vote restored until basically you have that felony removed from your record. A police officer will still see, oh, Michael Charlevoix was charged with but not convicted of a felony, 8 years ago now for me. Or, yeah, Michael Charlevoix was convicted of a felony. Oh, but it was expunged 3 years ago, or sealed, or whatever. And they can actually see what the felony was. It's not hard. But, yeah, it was expunged, sealed, whatever. So his duty to carry is restored. Oh, okay. All right, fine. Drug abusers. Any person convicted of a crime or voluntarily committed to treatment. In other words, if you have a drug problem, you probably shouldn't be carrying. You have a much more serious problem right now you need to deal with. And that's okay. I get it. Right now, you need to work on you. Mentally impaired, somebody who's just stupid. And there are people out there who are just fucking stupid. Talk about that a little bit more later. Psychological impairment. There are people out there who see things that aren't, or see people who aren't there and hear voices that aren't real. One of them is a cousin of mine. I love him, but no, I would personally walk in and testify at his mandatory exemption hearing saying, Your Honor, my cousin was literally talking to somebody called Jason who was standing right next to me, and he wasn't there. Indigent. This specifically means homeless. And Indigent is an affirmative defense. Cop walks up and sees you don't have a gun. And he probably is walking up for a different reason. He says, "Where's your gun?" You say, "I don't got one. I'm homeless." Okay, all right. Well, I'm writing you the citation for now. We'll talk about it in court. You then have to go to the courthouse and say, "Your Honor, I'm exempt. I'm indigent. I live out of the back of a Ford station wagon, and I got 3 citations for camping inside city limits." Yep. Okay. You're exempt. Go away. However, you don't have to apply for the exemption on indigence. It's not a requirement. Membership in violent political organizations. This is known as the Antifa exemption because I had them specifically in mind when I first wrote this. But it does apply to the KKK, the neo Nazis, certain communist groups, etc. There's a lot of violent political protesters out there. The Weathermen, they were communists. They blew up a train. This is the only one that is really a total fuck you for life. You lose your right to vote. You lose your duty to carry. You lose your right to carry. You lose your right to carry anything. Did I mention it's for life? You're stuck with this for the rest of your life because you decided that you were going to blow up a train or spike a tree or block a ambulance that's responding to an incident or take over the rotunda of a state capitol to the point where the members of the state legislature could not conduct business. That's something to keep in mind. All right. It's one thing to just be in there, stand out of the way of, of traffic. All right. So people can still move around and get their business done and silently protest. It's something else to literally fill every square inch of the rotunda so that business cannot get done. If you want to get this one off of off of your record, well, good luck. Also, if you have a violent political protester exemption, you may not hold any public office, including at the county and city level. All of these do require a judge to say, yes, you're exempt, no, you're not. If they say, yes, you are, you're good to go. There is something called a process judge, I believe is what the term was, which is actually a little bit more than a county clerk. You still have to go in front of them and say, hey, look, my right arm is artificial because I was born without a right arm. You show it to them. They may have actually say, I want you to take that off because I want to make sure it's really an artificial arm and not a very good uh, cosplay piece. That has happened. In that case, you may have to actually show them. Some of these, although they can be addressed by a process server or a process judge, rather, may require an actual bench judge. That's the traditional black robe sitting up on a bench in front of a courtroom, Perry Mason style. Um, Especially, and this comes up later, in third party application cases. Conditional exemptions. The following categories of persons may, at their own discretion, be exempt of carry during such times as said condition exists. 1. Intoxicated persons. Any person under or intending to be under the influence of an intoxicating substance as established by their state's drunk driving statutes. Any person within 100 feet of their home, vehicle, place of employment, or a residency they have a right to be in as a guest. Exempt locations. As provided below, persons on exempt locations other than employees are exempt from carrying during their time there. No location may enact a gun-free zone declaration of its own, and all other gun-free zone laws and ordinances are hereby repealed. Employees of exempt locations are not eligible for any exemption under this act. Persons in specific working conditions wherein compliance with the law presents such an unacceptable risk to their own safety or that of those around them of unintentional injury are exempt while the specific circumstance exists. This section refers to working conditions only. Maintenance. Any person who has surrendered a weapon to an FFL holder for maintenance and or gunsmithing may show the receipt for the weapon to any peace or court officer. No citation may be written if presented at time of discovery. Any citation shall be dismissed for cause if presented in court without additional fee nor fine. Any professional other than an FFL holder or employee of an authorized gunsmith who attempts to determine the cause of the weapon surrender shall be fined not less than $1,000. Any private party who attempts to determine the reason for a weapon surrender under this section shall be fined not more than $500. Any person working at the behest of a third party shall be considered a professional for the purposes of this section. Okay, so intoxicated person, you think that's self-explanatory. Sometimes it's not. If you're drunk, if you're high, you're exempt. It's fine. And you may not be able to leave the gun in your car now while you go into the bar. Now, that opens up a big ass another can of worms that says, wait a minute, you left your gun at home, but you were going to drive there after drinking. That's a big question mark, isn't it? The cop doesn't have to be too bright to understand this guy's about to go drunk driving. So all I have to do is sit here and watch him for a couple hours. And he's going to be busted for drunk driving. I would rather be busted for not having my weapon on me for a third, fourth, eighth time than busted for drunk driving. Holy shit, have you seen those? Any person within 100 feet of their home, vehicle, place of employment, or residence, they have a right to be in. This is the milk and beer and cookies exemption. You're at home, you want a pack of cookies and a 6-pack of beer. So you run over to the Chevron right across the street, right? And you're in there, and a cop says, "Hey, you don't have a gun on you." No, I left it at home. Yeah? How far away is home? It's right across the street. I swear to God, it's right across the street. What apartment is it? 3A. It's not actually mine, it's my buddy's. So if I go knock on his door, he's going to say the same thing? Yes. The cop that follows up on that is probably having a bit of a slow night, but they might, and they can. And 3A better vouch for you. It's kind of as simple as that. Exempt locations. Exempt locations is listed elsewhere. If you're going into an exempt location, some cases you must, and in other cases you may have to surrender your weapon, and that's fine. You're going into an exempt location that meets the other standards, and you are not an employee. I want to point something out. An employee of an exempt locations list is not included on this list. They're not conditionally exempt, at least not for being an employee. Persons in specific working conditions. The one I thought of first was uh, electric utility linemen. It does happen from time to time. Electric utility linemen get zapped. They don't always die. Sometimes they're just hurt and kind of hurt bad. And they may argue that their gun is an unacceptable risk because it could discharge, especially if it's a revolver. That is an argument they may make. And you know what? That's fine. I get it. If your working conditions present an unacceptable risk of unintentional injury, great. Good for you. With the grace of God, go. And by the way, I want to point out grace of anything is where you have done nothing wrong, go. As opposed to the mercy of whatever, you've done something wrong and they're letting you go anyway. This is with the grace of God and man. Go back to being a utility, an electric utility lineman. Forget about it. You're good. Just go. We're very sorry to have inconvenienced you by having you come down here and answer the summons. Maintenance. All right. It does say maintenance. You walk into an FFL holder for maintenance and or gunsmithing. You hand it over. They give you a receipt so you can collect it a few days later because your sights are off or your trigger's sticking or whatever the hell the reason is. Whatever your reason is. And by the way, they have an exemption for a 10-round mag use because they're fixing your gun. There's also a undercurrent here. This is actually the hold my guns exemption. I call it that because Ghost Tactical interviewing Hold My Guns made me realize that this is an issue. Hold My Guns, what they do is if you're having a bad spot in your life where you think you need to give up your guns, your fault, their fault, nobody's fault at all. You can walk into any one of their partners, hand over your gun, and say, "Just please hold it for me. I'm going to get my head straight. I'm going to figure out what's going on. I'm going to go. It might be you have a drug addiction. You say, yeah, I need somebody to hold these because I'm going to do something stupid. Whatever it is, you walk in. They don't even ask what it is. They don't want to know. Is my understanding of half of their partners. They're going to hand you the receipt. Say thanks. Come back in a month. Now, if it's a hold my guns exemption, give them an excuse. My sights are off. My trigger's sticking. I squeeze the trigger and sometimes it goes bang and sometimes it doesn't, and I don't know why. The gunsmith is going to take it in the back and say, there's nothing wrong. Oh, I know what this is. And they are not allowed to tell anybody except you. Now, if you tell the whole fucking world, yeah, it's a hold my guns exemption, then that's on you. That's totally on you. And I've been there. I've done that. This was long before Hold My Guns was a thing. It was long before Walk the Talk America was a thing. It's 2003. One morning, I turned to Papa Carey and said, I think I need the guns to go to Reading. I was living in Sacramento at the time. That was kind of a wake-up call to me, too. I needed to start doing some things differently in my life. Half an hour later, the guns were out of the house. Mom and Dad were on their way to Reading. Know my parents very, very well. I know how fast Dad was driving. It might also be a legitimate problem. Your sights really are off. Gunsmith takes in the back. He puts the little lasers and everything else on it. He's looking at it saying, huh, yeah, the sights are off. Is it the rear sight or the front sight that's bad here? That is um, that is a legitimate thing. And it covers all these other issues so neatly, so compactly. I also want to point out any professional other than the FFL holder that you are speaking to hold, repair, whatever your gun, who attempts to determine the cause shall be fined not less than $1,000. I know it's going to happen. A reporter looking for dirt on somebody says, "Hey, Michael Charlevoix, that's mandatory carry himself, and he doesn't carry. Why not?" Huh. Go back and try and find out. That's a $1,000 fine. Fuck you. Um, a peace officer stops me and says, "Hey, where's your gun?" So, here's my receipt. You see it's Joe's gun shop, and he knows Joe. Joe isn't a gun shop; he's a pawn shop. Yeah. So, why's your gun in the shop? That's a $1,000 fine. Now, realistically, is that fine ever going to be imposed? Well, only if you become an obnoxious twat. Realistically speaking, a cop that asks, give him an excuse. Oh man, I was so short on money, and I just told him my sights were off. Go get your gun back as fast as you can. Or maybe Joe's gun shop really is gun shop really is a gun shop. Yeah, my sights are off. I can't see properly. I can't see the target properly. It keeps shifting a little further and further to the left, if you know what I mean. Ooh, okay. No problem. Now, if you're a cop, I really recommend you don't ask because you could be held to the standard. If you're a reporter, don't ask because I'm particular about reporters digging into personal affairs of people that they don't need to be digging into. Any private party who attempts to determine the cause for weapon surrender under this section shall be fined not more than $500. I go into a bar, I got the little wristband that says I'm a designated driver and I don't have a gun on me. Some check says, "Hey, where's your gun?" Huh? Oh, I left it at home. Oh, right. Is that really an attempt to determine the cause of a surrender? No, not really. Could I push it that direction? Yeah. Any person working at the behest of a third party shall be considered a professional. Same situation. It's the chick at the bar. She's been sent in because everybody's heard I go to this particular bar in Old Sac. There was a bar that I could say. So she tries to cozy up to me to find out why. All she got out of me was I left it at home. She attempted to find out why I turned my gun in to Joe's gun shop. That is a $1,000 and a big fuck you, bitch. Don't try that. It's not a good idea. You got to get caught first, but sooner or later, if you keep trying, you will get caught. Elective exemptions, conscientious objector. Any person who applies for an elective for exemption as a conscientious objector, having established probable likelihood based on third party sworn affidavit, may receive an exemption no greater than the nature of the objection. Personal exemption. Any person that, for reasons not listed here, may be exempt upon payment of $300 per month fee. Such exemptions are total without exemption. Okay, conscientious objector. I know a few conscientious objectors. They're down for the violence. They're down for the one-on-one, the fisticuffs, um, whatever, right? I met this guy. I don't want to out him because he's got a very, very unique name. He's an old sack um, haunt, and oh my god, this guy would get arrested 2 and 3 times a week sometimes because he'd get into fights. Well, that 2 or 3 times a week is somebody heard about the legend of, and go down there and say, "Hey, I'm going to take him on and see if I can beat his ass." What they didn't realize is this guy was a professional fighter. Or maybe they were just too drunk to understand this guy's a professional. All right. I'm kind of a quasi paraprofessional fighter. This guy was, well, he was a featherweight MMA uh, fighter at one time. People kept fucking with him. There was one time when this woman was so drunk she couldn't fall down straight. He dropped her with a single hit. He's the one that went to jail because he's a professional. So he would have to go through the rigmarole of getting the judge to say, yeah, okay, I get it. Somebody started a fight with you again. Lady, we're going to let you go because you're fucking stupid. Dude, I know, but we got to go through this each and every time. Just go away. Don't go starting no fights. To the best of my knowledge, he only ever started one fight, and that was a situation over a girl. He did clock a cop really good one time. His explanation to the judge and even the cop was like, "Yeah, that could be true. That's what it looked like to me." I don't know exactly the words the cop used, but he confirmed, yes, that's true. He said somebody ran up behind him, grabbed him, and spun him around. So he thought it was this other guy who did start the fight with him over the woman that started the fight with him. I thought it was his buddy coming up behind me. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late, and I clocked that poor guy. The judge dismissed all 3 sets of charges. He did get a little bit of trouble for hitting a cop, but not nearly as much as he could have. I would be very happy, and I really would love to track this guy down, but it's been almost 20 years now, to testify at his conscientious objector hearing. Say, Your Honor, I can't carry a weapon because I will get into all of these situations. He already was a conscientious objector. That's the reason why he became an MMA fighter, because he got tired of people bullying him and just beating up on him. So he became a fighter, and he discovered he was really good at it in the ring with rules. The problem is people found out he was really good in the ring with rules and decided they would try him out outside the ring with no rules. Oops, don't do that. That's really stupid. There's a couple people I know or know of who their conscientious objector status is limited to lethal force. They don't believe that they can or should be allowed to kill. That's great. That's great. That's fine. I get it. I would never ask you to violate your conscience. Again, I would be very happy to testify as an expert witness in their hearing. I don't think I'll be required to do that a whole bunch of times, just once or twice at most. And I'm also, most people don't realize this, I am an ordained chaplain in my own right through World Christianship Ministries. I've done final rites, not fun. I've done baptismals, much more fun. And I've done a couple weddings, much, much more fun. Um, and I could testify as a conscientious objector application, third party, uh, sworn affidavit part, to say, yes, this person is, in my opinion, a legitimate conscientious objector. Now, you do not want me to do your conscientious objector third party sworn affidavit because I will do something that tests your resolve. Please, by all means, ask. My way of telling you, fuck you, that's a, a business secret, is, well, it's actually just about as polite as I described it just now. I would be happy upon having interviewed people claiming conscientious objector status to sit before a judge and say, yes, Your Honor, I interviewed this person at extreme length. I agree with their objection against deadly force, or I agree with their total exemption. Very interesting place to be. I would sign that affidavit myself. There's also a bunch of people I would never sign their affidavit because I know they're lying through their teeth. Personal exemption. You know what? I would love for you to find me any state, any county, any city in the entire United States or anywhere under U.S. Constitution protection that says for $300 per month, you can ignore seatbelt laws. It does not exist. So just say thank you, Carrie, for saying that there is an exemption, for a personal exemption. It is payment at $300 per month. I set it high to make it cheaper to buy the gun. It's as simple as that. That one is also total without exemption. As long as you possess that personal exemption, which you can hand over at any time, you don't even have to have a reason. And go back to accepting that you're a mandatory carrier. You are not permitted to carry any weapons of any sort. You are at the Antifa exemption level. So just don't do it. Categories of exemption. Total restriction. A person under a total restriction may not possess any item identifiable for use as a weapon. Partial restriction. A person under partial restriction may not possess any weapon of certain characteristics as ordered by a competent jurist, such as firearm, edged, blunt, chemical, etc. General restriction. Restrictions to general categories or capabilities, such as deadly or ranged. Selective restrictions. Restrictions to specific types of weapons only, knives, pepper sprays, etc. Any person under a deadly weapons exemption may not possess any item determined to be a deadly weapon except in immediate labor or cased. Said case must have a locking mechanism in operating order. Any person under exemption against deadly weapon may not possess firearms under any conditions. All right, so this goes back a little while to mandatory exemptions. There is a particular uh, very famous person who has publicly said that she used to play with knives in ways that are not appropriate. If I were a member of her family, and this will come up later, I might apply for a selective restriction knives for her because she's going to kill herself or her lover sooner or later. It's just a matter of time. She's also a Second Amendment advocate. um, which is a very interesting position to be in. Um, but she has never played with guns the way she plays with knives. Well, okay. The judge might say, yes, you know what? Based on her own public statement, I think the selective restriction, lady, no more knives for you. Just no. Um, Partial restriction. Hey, you know what? I would understand if somebody put or attempted to get a partial restriction for me for chemical weapons because I have openly said I'm a little too fond of pepper spray, a little too loose with it. Maybe I shouldn't use it quite as quickly as I do sometimes. Good luck fighting that battle, but if I were somebody who knew my history and said, "Yeah, you pepper spray people too easily," I would understand why they might, especially a member of my family, I would understand why they might go to a judge and say, "Your Honor, we're asking that Michael Charlevoix be stripped of possessing uh, pepper spray and mace because he'll just spray fucking everybody and he doesn't care." He's even said he cares a little bit more about brass knuckles than he does pepper spray because pepper spray is not considered a deadly weapon. I think the judge, after hearing my side of the story, might not agree, but hey, you know what? It could happen. Total restrictions, everything. Just nope, you're done. Now, a person under deadly weapons exemption may not possess any item determined to be a deadly weapon, except in immediate labor or cased. A hammer can be a deadly weapon. You can beat somebody's skull in real good with one of those things. I've seen the crime scene photos. Ooh, ooh. There was that was not identifiable as a human head anymore. And this was just a common uh, boxing hammer, right? Or maybe a carpenter's hammer. I'm a little shaky about the difference between the two. That was not no longer identifiable as a human head. The only thing that could be identified was A, guts everywhere, B, blood everywhere, and C, hair. Now you're a convicted felon, but you're also a carpenter by trade. The crime under which you were convicted was only, let's say, third degree manslaughter, right? You were acting in self defense up to a point, and then it was no longer self defense. You'd gone way too far. You need to go sit in a quiet place for a couple of years. Think about yourself and the things you've done. Okay, you go to prison, you sit in that quiet place for a few years. Think about the things you've done. You are now released. You were a model prisoner. You did all the other things. And you were even very open and honest and say, Your Honor, you, at trial, by the way, yes, Your Honor, he attacked me. I swung the hammer once and then I went black and I don't know what happened next. The only thing I know is I kept beating him and there was blood everywhere. Okay, you are a perfect model candidate for a third degree manslaughter. You were acting in self defense and you went way too far. It happens. It does legitimately happen. Oh, excuse me. In a third degree manslaughter case, you're not acting in self defense. You're acting in what you thought was self defense when you started acting. And the facts afterwards prove, no, no, this was not self defense. It's just reasonable to presume you were. Okay, now you're out of prison. You're still a carpenter, but you still have this felony conviction and you haven't addressed that yet. Okay. Immediate uh, immediate labor or cased. Your hammer is on your tool belt and you are prepared to start sinking nails. it's still immediate labor, or cased. In a case, locked. So this sort of thing can't happen again. I think I've explained this as far as it needs. If you still have questions, of course, that's what the comments are for. Exempt person in possession. Any exempt person in possession of any weapon they are prohibited to possess shall be guilty of a misdemeanor unless related to a felony under state or federal laws, in which case they shall be guilty of a felony punishable by not more than 10 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. Exemptions. Innocent transport. Any exempt person transporting a weapon for the purposes of destruction or to surrender to law enforcement, or in a condition incapable of use without using tools to prepare it. Obtained as a result of struggle, any exempt person who, in the course of a physical alteration for which they are not the initiant and are not violent political protesters, shall be exempt from this section provided the weapon is surrendered with the greatest possible urgency. Okay, innocent transport. There is this thing of people finding guns while they're fishing or they're magnet fishing, guns found in dumpsters, guns found in homes, guns and other things. I was helping a lady to clean up a home after she started renting it. It was part of her rental agreement. I'm pulling insulation out from the basement, and something just dropped right in front of my face. And I looked down and I said, "That better fucking be soap." Well, it wasn't. It was meth. Okay. All right, fine. I found meth. If I had found a gun under these circumstances, I could very readily call up SAC PD and say, um, I live at such an address. I'm right next door. And we were cleaning up this old house and I found a gun. Yeah, yeah, please come down here and take it from me. No, 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 code one. I'm very happy to hand this over. Um, I'm going to put it in a brown paper bag and I'm going to sit on the front porch and wait for the cop to show up. Um, that's purposes of destruction or surrender to law enforcement. I would be fine. Innocent transport. I'm handing it over to the cops as fast as I can, and now I'm kind of restricted by the speed by which they respond. Obtained as a result of struggle. Believe it or not, criminals are more likely to be targeted for violent crime than criminals because criminals know they can't really turn to the cops. As a general rule, they can't turn to the cops. They, well, gun found in a dumpster behind California's Department of Motor Vehicles headquarters. Oh, it's about 50, excuse me, about 22, 23 years ago. It was probably dumped there by a criminal who took it from somebody who was trying to rob him because he didn't want to get caught with the gun either. Right? It's not my gun. I don't want my fingerprints on it. I don't want it associated with me in any way, shape, or form, but I can't hand it over to the cops because then I'm a criminal, or a felon in possession of a firearm. No, that's no longer a concern. Obtained as a result of a struggle. In both of these exemptions, hand it over to the cops or have it destroyed as quickly as you really can do it. and you're fine. You're golden. I would really recommend just always hand it over to cops and don't make an issue. Don't say anything that you don't have to. You have a right to remain silent. Use it. Hand it over. You're good to go. Oh, damn. Exempt locations. Person other than employees in the following locations are exempt. Airports. Any person other than airport employees shall not possess any weapon in an airport. Said weapons may be checked into their baggage only as provided under federal law. Law enforcement personnel not traveling on agency business in custody of a suspect or other person of interest are included in this restriction. Airports, airlines, states, and municipalities may not establish additional restrictions. Airport and airline employees are required to carry a handgun while on duty, except as provided under conditional exemptions. K-12 schools, any person other than staff shall not be required to possess any weapon on school grounds where armed security is provided. Said weapons may be surrendered to school staff or stowed in lockers at point of entry before entry and shall be returned upon departure or may be left in the individual's vehicle. School employees are required to carry a handgun while on duty except as provided under conditional exemptions. Government buildings. Any person other than building staff shall not be required to possess any weapon in government buildings where armed security is provided. Said weapons may be surrendered to building staff before entry and shall be returned upon departure. Building staff are required to carry while on duty except as provided under conditional exemptions. Law enforcement personnel are required to retain their firearms in schools, government buildings, and other exempt locations except airport when not traveling in custody of a suspect or other person of interest. Such facilities as can be shown by good cause and reasonable prudence to and caution to be unsafe for carry of any weapons or of selected restrictions to the degree thereof. Military and law enforcement personnel are exempt from the restrictions on military bases. Base commanders may refuse access to the base to law enforcement personnel for cause. Okay, a whole lot here. First of all, if you're an employee at one of these exempt locations, you still have to carry. So if you are a convicted felon, good luck working at an airport. Um, Airports are the only ones that are universal. Just let it go. K-12 schools and government buildings. You notice in government buildings on school grounds where armed security is provided. Yeah, it has to be 24 hours security and it has to meet the standard, right? There is a courthouse in Oregon that I went to several times where they have a metal detector, but they only set it up if they think that there's a situation developing where they might need it. And they only set it up on the day that they need it. So you come in the day before or a couple days before, you can hide a gun in that building pretty easily. It's never mind how I know. Um, well, fuck it. An individual that I was familiar with who had a interest in bringing a gun into that courthouse went in a couple days before on unrelated business. The day after she went there, another female um, acquaintance of mine went into that same courthouse and checked the heads, and sure enough, there was a gun duct taped underneath the sink. That gun went to the bottom of the river, and nobody's seen it since. That's not the best way to have handled that situation, but it worked. That's all I'd rather say about that because it would involve doxing myself. There is another courthouse that I have had to deal with on occasion where they have had 24-hour armed security almost as long as I've been alive. I think they started sometime in the early or mid 80s, having a sheriff's deputy patrolling the building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and just inside the building after hours. They installed metal detectors in the mid or late 1980s when the cost of metal detectors came way down, and everyone has to walk through that metal detector. Police officers actually have to show their badge before they come in the building. Now, if they're in regular uniform, that's showing the badge. Um, if they're not, they have to show their badge, and undercover officers have a unusual issue in this department. It is what it is. In all three cases, airports, schools, and government buildings, if you can show good cause why you should be exempt, you may still be able to get an exemption, but that's also called a workplace exemption. And to be perfectly honest, there's only one kind of workplace that I know of that might be in all three. Here's a hint: it's not the generator room. And yeah, okay, great, good for you. A judge might also say, okay, well, you don't have to carry a gun, but you do have to carry pepper spray. Or you don't have to carry pepper spray, but you do have to carry a gun because that's the situation that as the judge sees it. I am not going to second guess a judge in a hypothetical situation from 100 miles away. It's just not going to happen. I'd be more than happy to sit in on such a hearing and then be asked to give an expert opinion. I'm not sure if I can give an expert opinion from 100 miles and 10 years ahead, 100 miles away and 10 years ahead. Third party exemptions. Any person either unable or unwilling to apply for a mandatory exemption may have said exemption applied to a court on their behalf. Any person for whom an exemption is requested by a third party may petition the court to refuse said exemption and has the right to a hearing by an impartial jury. A judge, based upon the testimony and evidence, may overrule the jury upon approval of the exemption by said jury and may not overrule a jury upon denial of said exemption. Okay, there are people out there for one reason or another either cannot, um, certain cases of mental or psychological incompetence, or will not because they're fucking assholes, and it's usually uh, psychological incompetence. And there are cases where it's just pro forma. Um, Felony conviction. If the district attorney, upon filing a charge, an information sheet to the court, which says, I believe this individual, this named individual, on the such and such a day, at or about such and such a time, committed armed robbery. If they don't include as part of the requested, um, it's not that's not the right word, but that is what it boils down to. Um, remediation. the penalty that they're requesting, uh, exemption for mandatory carry, well, they're just not doing their job very damn well. The defendant in the case pleads not guilty. Your Honor, I didn't do it. And they refuse to ever say anything else. And they put up a great defense and da 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 da. The judge at the end of the day says, yeah, actually, you did do this. And you're going away for 2, 5, 10, 12, however many years. It should also be as part of pro forma. I sentence you to the Department of Corrections for a period of not less than blah, but not more than blah years. I hereby relieve you of your duty to keep and bear arms. I order restitution and blah, 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 blah. Those words should just be pro forma. It should just be part of it. Any DA that doesn't do that, any judge that doesn't do that, isn't doing their job very damn well. A person for whom a third party exemption is requested may ask for a hearing by an impartial jury. I already know that when this passes, there are 4 people that will apply for a psychological and mental exemption for me. Personally. I already know 2 of the names off the top of my head. It's my 2 ex-wives. If my first wife is still alive at that point, I have my second ex-wife. Not coincidentally, I would be willing to testify at my second ex-wife's exemption hearing, but I wouldn't apply for her third party, and I won't testify at a third party exemption for her. For my first wife, sure, no problem. She needs one. I have a right to have that heard by an impartial jury. The jury will decide first whether or not I should have an exemption. Now, juries do sometimes make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are based on public umbrage. I guarantee you, in a jury, be it 6 or 12 people, in any state, any county, any city, they will find at least one person on that jury who applied for a conscientious objector or maybe kind of tried to skirt a alcohol exemption, an inebriation exemption, because they don't like this law. It's going to happen. It's an inevitability. And that person is the one who is going to grant every single third-party exemption, no matter what it is. And okay, fine. You'll notice there's nothing here that actually sets the standard for what the jury's ruling is. I'm still leaving that up for debate. Is it one holdout? Is it half of them holdout? I want to leave that unanswered for the moment. Constitution doesn't always answer these kinds of questions either, so take it for what it is. A jury, based on the testimony and evidence, may overrule the jury upon an approval of exemption, but not on a denial. Okay. The judge is sitting up there. He's hearing all of this evidence and testimony. In the back of his mind, he knows there's going to be someone on one of these juries that says yes no matter what, because they didn't like this law. Maybe the judge doesn't like it either. That's your right. You have every right to hate this law. I do, right? The judge is sitting up there and he's hearing this. He's realizing this story doesn't make sense. The applicant's story is that the applicee is acts inappropriately with firearms. Yes, he does actually make sure the gun is unloaded every time he starts showing off. Yes, he does this. Yes, he does that, but he's still inappropriate around weapons. Your story isn't holding water. The jury, by absolute unfortunate happenstance is 12 men and women who were all um, elective exemption. 3 of them are conscientious objectors. 3 more are other elective exemptions, and the other 6 are people who cheat the alcohol exemption, the drunk driving exemption. Ooh, bad luck. They're all happen to be the sort of people who are going to say yes to the exemption no matter what. Okay, well, I judge Michael Charlevoix, Honorable Justice Charlevoix. I'm hearing all of this and saying, yeah, that's all bullshit. I'm not believing a word of your story. I am believing the applicee, the person against who this exemption is being supposedly going to be applied, exemptee, excuse me. I heard everything he said. Um, when he starts showing off with his guns, he always makes sure they're not only unloaded and clear, but if they have a magazine, the mag is removed or opened, the barrel's flagged. If it doesn't have a magazine, perhaps a revolver. There's a gun lock in 2 of the 6 cylinders. Yeah. There's no way this story makes sense. This story just is bullshit. I know it. And this jury agreed with the third party applicant. Oh, yes, of course. He's obviously dangerous around guns. We need to give him an exemption. Yeah, no, we're not doing that. He's approving, or he's overruling the denial, and the exemptee is hereby, the exemption is hereby denied. Now, if the same jury is all filled with no matter what types, right? The sort of people who went out and got their CCWs years before mandatory carry passed, and then when it did, or as it was coming along, financially supported the effort. And he's sitting here listening to the third party exemption applicants story about just how really dangerous this guy is, because he doesn't get it. He's kind of an idiot. And the applicant, or the exemptee, is saying, "Oh, no. I'm safe around guns. I'm good. And he's hearing it, and everything he's hearing is, no, this guy's really stupid and shouldn't be allowed to have an oversized letter opener. But the jury says no. The judge cannot overrule that exemption, or that cannot overrule that. The duty to keep and bear is still on the would-be exemptee. The applicant, in this case, the third-party applicant, is not going to be punished, or at least is not going to be punished here, because there's nothing here that says anything about punishing a abusive third-party exemption application. You can kind of stretch it out from the false pretenses clause, but good luck. Section 6, restrictions. The federal government may only restrict suppressors, silencers, assault weapons, machine guns, autocannons, rotary guns, AOWs, and explosive incendiary other than tracer, and armor penetrator munitions as follows. Weapons included in these definitions may require a license to possess, not to exceed A, a single-page form establishing who the applicant and or designated representative is and where the weapons will be stored. B, a form for each transfer establishing who is receiving said weapon. C, a fee not to exceed actual cost to government for processing. The states may impose or mandate no restrictions, fees, or other controls not specifically provided for within this act. The states may impose reasonable restrictions on the licensure for concealed carry and may accept concealed carry permits, must accept concealed carry permits from the sister states without exemption. Said requirements may not include a mandate for liability insurance nor mental health evaluation. States are not obligated to issue concealed carry permits from residents of other states, nor are they forbidden to do so. Concealed carry permit processing may not take longer than 7 working days. Any concealed carry permit application not completed in said time frame shall be conditionally approved. Any concealed carry application not completed within 30 working days of that shall be unconditionally approved. Time restrictions for unconditional approval may be suspended during the state of emergency upon declaration by a governor or the president for not more than 30 days unless renewed by the state legislature or Congress, and then for the duration of the crisis, during which time conditional approval shall stay in effect. Any item covered under this act is protected in all other considerations and may be transported across state lines without other restriction in the control of the registered owner. Okay, so this is actually an expansion on the restrictions from earlier and a clarification on some of it. Rotary guns, autocannons. You notice rotary guns does not require a motor. Okay. Yeah, under certain states' laws, bicycles are considered uh, motor vehicles and therefore subject to the vehicle code, which includes which direction you ride, where you ride, that you have to stop for stop signs, you have to stop for stoplights, you have to ride with traffic, you can't ride up on the sidewalk because that's reserved for pedestrians. You can't ride in the crosswalk because that's reserved for pedestrians. All of these other things. There's no motor on it. Well, yes, there is. Your legs on the motor. All right. It may not be an internal combustion engine. It may not be an electric motor. It may not be a lot of other motors, but it's still a motor. And if you really want me to spurg out on this someday, I will. Here's the short version. Rotary guns. Now, it may come to pass that there is a rotary gun that cannot be hopper or other continuous feed mechanism fed. Okay. A court somewhere might make that exemption. If and when that happens, let me know. It also restricts suppressors and silencers. There might come a day when there is a court that says, this suppressor silencer does not reduce the noise to the point where it's not audible at 100 feet, 500 feet, quarter of a mile, whatever the arbitrary number that court says. This is not really a suppressor. This certainly isn't a silencer. It's exempt. I'm going to let the courts battle that out because I know that I don't necessarily know enough to know what I don't know about this subject. I know there are some really awesome suppressors out there. I know that there's one that reduces the report of the discharge to a decibel level lower than the noise made by the hammer falling. All right, that happens to be a well rod. No, excuse me, that wasn't the well rod. That was damn it, I forgot who that was. I forgot which one that was. Um, that's a pretty good suppressor. It's not as good as the original, the well rod. Okay. I think I should let the battle of the experts decide this matter. And it's really as simple as that. Now, if a couple of you experts want to hop on in and start fighting this battle out, I'd be happy to be educated completely. No, this is not one of those, I'm popping popcorn right now. No, no. This is legitimately, hey, you know what? I would like to have this question clarified. Um, Incendiary other than tracer. Tracer rounds are considered incendiary under current federal law. Yeah, because they do have an incendiary element to them. To the best of my knowledge, no tracer round has ever started a fire, but they're considered incendiary because they make heat. No, because Bill Clinton wanted them, wanted another excuse to ban guns. It really is as simple as that. Um, the rest of this is designed to protect the people from abuse by the government. Most specifically, the one-page requirement and fee not to exceed actual cost to government for processing. This particularly is stuck in my craw. The 1938 law set a $200 fee for all stamps. It was an arbitrary number. Well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. There's a lot of debate about that. It never changed. Somebody in 1938, $200 is a year's income or more. Um, for a lot of people surviving through the Great Depression, $200 was 2.5 years, maybe even 3 years of income. And that's not after expenses. That's well before expenses. $1 a day was not unheard of. Today, when I am working full time, I could get 2 stamps out of a single week. I can get 5 stamps out of a pay period. I don't, but I could theoretically. This also sets requirements about how and when states will issue or accept out of state concealed carry permits, which is always in all circumstances. It does allow the states to set reasonable regulations for licensure. And within that is a big fuck you to certain states where they're setting unreasonable. And I'd be very happy to testify as an expert at a New York or California hearing on this subject. Don't threaten me with what I want. It does not allow for liability or mental health liability insurance or mental health evaluations. If it was up to me, liability insurance for guns would be banned. Cooler heads talked me down. There is a reason why the liability insurance exists. I get it. But I'm not going to support it. It's as simple as that. If there are any other legitimate questions, please mention them in comments.